Greetings, gamers! Welcome to the fourth installment of my series, Dissecting Rogue Decks. And in today's episode, I'm going to be going over just one of some of my fun decks. I have 6 Mega Monarch decks. I'm going to go over each individual one in his individual episode. It's going to take a while to do this, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm going to get to show off the strategy of each individual deck and what they do, as well as how you can make them vastly different from one another whilst still utilizing the Monarch engine and the Monarch monsters. Without further ado, let us get right into it. All right, gamers. First and foremost is my Raiza deck, the Mega Monarch of Raiza. I actually find that Raiza is very underrated, but also one of the only monarchs that's still played today because it can be used in a different archetype, which is pretty funny. I wouldn't say that Raiza is my favorite. I actually think Zaborg and Caius are ones that I like more. But even saying that, I love Raiza too. I love Thestalos. Mobius is a lot of fun because he is basically a Harpy's Feather Duster that has spell speed 4 potential, which is insane. So I personally just have like a fondness with the Mega Monarchs, and I cannot wait to get into exactly how they all play. You'll notice that all of them are going to be 48 card decks, so they are at the upper limit of the exact amount of cards that could be used in a deck in order to still be as consistent as going first with 40 cards. So how this works, and a lot of people don't understand this, there is science and mathematics behind the number of cards you can play, as well as the limit, the lower limit and the upper limit of your decks, and how many cards you can have in your decks for the ratios to make sense. If you have 40 cards in your deck, you have a 5-card hand. That means if you want 1 card out of that deck in that hand, you have a 1 out of 8 chance that you're going to draw that card. If you have 2 copies of that card, that doubles to a 1 out of 4 chance. And if you have 3 copies of that card, it doubles to a 1 out of 2 chance. Now, these are just rough estimates because it's more or less like 48 or 49% chance. It's not 50% chance you're going to start with 1 copy in your 5 cards, right? So what's interesting is that when you go second, you draw 6 cards, 5 at first, and then you draw 1 for your draw phase. So you have 6 cards. 48 divided by 6 is 8. So 40 divided by 5 is 8. It is the exact same consistency as well as amount and percentage of your chance of getting the same cards into your hand as if you had 40 cards going first. This is the reason why 42 to 48 is considered the sweet spot. You could go with 40 going second, and there's ways that you could make all of these decks that I show you going second to have only 40 cards going first or second, and you will have better consistency because your percentage will be lesser. It's basically going to be like a 1 out of 6 rather than a 1 out of 8, like a 1 out of 6.7 something, if you have a 40 card deck going second when you draw the 6th card. So there are some upsides and some downsides to having a 48 card deck. The upsides is that I have more cards but with the same consistency, so I can slot in more things to have a better, more rounded strategy for more options on my going second. However, the downside is if you're made to go first, you're going to have pretty much a shot consistency compared to 40 card decks. And even if that's not really something you care about because your deck has a lot of 1-card combos, the issue is that it's still going to be less consistent and you're still going to have less access to due to the percentages being different. It's going to basically be a 1 out of 9.8 that you're going to draw a specific card that you want in your first hand of 5. So do keep that in mind. The ratios and all of that kind of mathematics, I know some people aren't really mathematical savvy, but typically the reason why a lot of us really get heavily into stuff like this is because we are, and we do enjoy those numbers and like finding the consistent spot. I only have one 60 card deck, and it is an Eldritch deck. It's not yet complete, unfortunately. But the reason why is because I don't really think that 60 card decks work very well. And the only way that you can functionally make them work is if you have a bunch of different ways to throw your cards into the grave so that you can use your graveyard as a toolbox. And that's one of the things that I think is most egregious about Yu-Gi-Oh! Though, is that the graveyard does become a toolbox, whereas it used to basically be how banishment is treated now. The best you had for toolboxing your graveyard was Monster Reborn at a time, and that's kind of a wild thought. So without further ado, it is time to get into my Raiza Mega Monarch deck. So I have 3 Aedea, the Heavenly Squire, and 3 Eidos, the Underworld Squire. All of my Mega Monarch decks use all 3 of each, and the reason why is because they are just the best way to reassure that I'm going to get 2 tributes on the field so that I can so that I can normal summon, tribute summon my Mega Monarch, or whatever else I need on the field. Now I have 2 Garam, the Storm Vassal. He's very important to the strategy because I can basically infinitely loop him with Raiza, the Mega Monarch, in order to keep returning cards from the graveyard and the field to the deck and to the hand. And that's pretty darn fun and powerful for the levels of power that I'm going to be fighting against with this kind of deck. Granted, as I've said before, disclaimer, none of these are meta. Even my deck that I use in Ranked, which is the previous episode, is not meta. So sure, it can stop some meta, it can stop some decks and cards, but none of this is going to compete with the absolute best. It's just not. This is for fun, just throwing it out there. I do have 1 Raiza, the Storm Monarch, the original. If this card is tribute summoned, target 1 card on the field, place that target on the top of the deck. This is actually very, very powerful removal for its day, and the reason why is because even though it targets, it places the card on the top of the deck. The deck is virtually unusable and is not a toolbox whatsoever without draw power or getting the cards into your hand first. And what that means is that this can basically turn off all of your opponent's plays, at least for the time that it was made. I actually very much so like going back and revisiting old school games of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Duel Academy or other things like on the GBA or the DS or so on and so forth, and playing with Monarchs, because Monarchs, whilst using, like, for instance, Cyber Dragons as their special summoning engine, the original Monarchs are actually insanely powerful for their day. They're not, like, amazing because there's so many cards that remove them, like Torrential Tribute or Dark or Trap Holes and stuff like that, but still, for their day, their effects were actually pretty darn good. The problem is that they're all mandatory trigger effects. So this means that if this is the only card that you summon and it's the only card that's on the field, he has to put himself on the top of the deck. Crazy. And the only way you can get away from doing this is if you have March of the Monarchs on the field, because it says neither player can target your tribute summon monsters on the field with card effects. So that means if he was the only card on the field, what you would have to do is you would have to target your March of the Monarchs instead. And that's unfortunate, but there's ways around this. I do have 1 Kiraz, and then I have 2 Kamungus, the Sticky String Kaiju, and 2 Gadarla, the Mystery Dust Kaiju. Now, I'm not going to go over their effects, other than the fact that it says you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's field in attack position by tributing 1 monster he controls. If your opponent controls a Kaiju monster, you can special summon this card from your hand in attack position. You can only control 1 Kaiju monster. That's all you need to know with Kamungus and Gadarla. They're both capable of just monster removal. They can monster remove anything that does not say on the card specifically that it cannot be tributed. There are less than 10 cards in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! That say they cannot be tributed. I can only think of personally 1, which is Eater of Millions. Maybe 1, I think Quintet Magician also off the top of my head might be one that can't be... I know it can't be used as fusion material, but I think that one can't be tributed. So, realistically speaking, they're the best monster removal in all of the game. The reason why I have them, however, isn't really for monster removal. It is so that I can get Godarla on the field, who is a wind monster, to get the extra effect of Raiza, the Mega Monarch, off on the field. So you have to tribute Raiza, the Mega Monarch, over a wind attribute monster in order to get his extra effects. This is true of every Mega Monarch. They must be tributed over their respective attribute in order to get the extra effect. And 9 times out of 10, you want the extra effect. I definitely do. With Raiza, in most cases, you can decide to not use the extra effect if there is no target on the field you would want to return to the hand. So there is that, just in case the only play you can make is by tributing him over a wind monster. And of course I do have more than just Godarla. I have Garum and the original Raiza Monarch, so I have multiple ways to make sure that he's tributed over a wind monarch, including 3 Restoration of the Monarchs, which allows me to tribute him over one monster that's counted as 2 tributes, as long as it has Monarch stats. So I could do it with Raiza, I could do it with Kiraz, I could do it with either Erebus or Ether, or even another Mega Monarch that's in my graveyard. Special summon them, and then use them as 2 tributes. So that's very cool. I have 1 Ether, 1 Erebus, and then I have 3 Alpha, the Master of Beasts. So he cannot be normal summon set, must first be special summoned from your hand, while the total attack of all monsters your opponent controls is more than that of all monsters you control. You can target any number of Beast Warrior and or Winged Beast monsters you control, return them to the hand. Then return face-up monsters your opponent controls to the hand equal to the number of cards you control you return to the hand. Also for the rest of this turn, Alpha the Master of Beast you control cannot attack directly. You can only use this effect of Alpha the Master of Beast once per turn. So the return effect is only once per turn. However, the special summon effect, as long as your opponent has more attack points than you, is continuous. It's forever. So that means that you could, in theory, get 2 Master of Beast, even 3 Master of Beast on your field if your opponent had more than 9,000 attack points on his field. So that's possible. It's actually also an interesting thought here. I have 2 Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. Destroy as many monsters on the field as possible, then special summon in attack position 2 Kaiju monsters with different names from your deck, 1 on each side, but they cannot change their battle positions and must attack if able. So this is a dark hole. Unfortunately, it can be ashed because it special summons from the deck, but it is a dark hole that puts a monster on my field and my opponent's field. So if I had Alpha in my hand, I would want to put Kamungus on my field and Godarla, who has more attack points, on my opponent's field, because then I could special summon Alpha to my field, use his effect, return him, and then return Godarla. This is insanely powerful. It is such an amazing combo with Kaijus. It's the only instance, though, that I'm using Alpha in any of my Monarch decks, even though they are all using Kaijus in this exact same fashion. The reason why this is because Alpha is not necessary in any other decks, and I really wanted to go for a return cards to the hand or the deck motif for this particular deck with Rise of the Mega Monarch, because that's what he does. He returns cards to the deck and to the hand from the field or from the graveyard. And because he does that, I wanted my deck to follow suit with those effects. I have 1 Harpy's Feather Duster. I have 1 Foolish Burial to get things like Erebus to the grave, and maybe Eidos or Idea, so on and so forth. I could even get Garum to the grave. That's not necessarily all that bad of an idea, especially if I wanted to return them to my hand or to the deck. Reinforcements of the Army. This is for adding Idea. I have Pot of Avarice, 3 Pantheism, 2 Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, like I said, 1 Foolish Burial Goods, so send 1 spell and trap from your deck to your hand. You can only activate 1 Foolish Burial Goods per turn. This is a very interesting card. It basically allows me to set up things like Pantheism or Prime Monarch without necessarily having to summon Erebus or Ether. And then I have Restoration of the Monarchs, as I've mentioned before, 3 of those. I have 1 March of the Monarchs, 1 Return of the Monarchs, 3 the Monarch Storm 4th, and then I have 3 Compulsory Evacuation Device. So target 1 monster on the field, return that target to the hand. Just more return effects. It's a very interesting trap. It is technically a card that allows me, by its generic effect, to go first. Because if I put this on the field, my opponent's monster could be sent back to the hand. That's not exactly why I'm using this. I'm using this so I can return kaijus to my hand that I've given to my opponent. Mostly. Of course, it is just monster removal regardless, but it is targeted monster removal, so it's not always perfect. I have 1, the Monarchs Awaken, 1 Jar of Avarice, 1 Escalation of the Monarchs, and 2 the Prime Monarchs. You're going to see me use 1 Jar of Avarice and 1 Pot of Avarice in pretty much almost every single rogue deck I play, and the reason why is because that's one of the things that I love the most in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is recursion. I love recursion, and it's why Monarchs are my all-time favorite archetype. That's what they do. They tribute, they're an old school archetype. See, it's not just because they recur. It's because they're an old school archetype. They're a 2-card combo tribute summon deck that has some pretty awesome trigger effects. I love trigger effects. They're pretty cool. And they have recursion. All of this stuff together makes these decks fun for me. Now, that was the showcase of my deck. Now it is time for the demonstration. Okay, so going second is always what I want to do with all of my Mega Monarch decks, except for I think maybe 1 or 2. And even them would still prefer to go second. All of them. They're all 48 card decks. They would all prefer to go second just because of that. So there is that. Now with my hand, I actually have what I would consider a pretty decent hand, all things considered. I'm going to go ahead and throw away Restoration. Draw 2 cards. Very nice. And then I can banish my... Let's see, what do I want? I think I'm going to either choose Return or one of these 2. And I got Return. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to use Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. And then Godarla to my field, Kamungus to my opponent's field. So if you use Kaijus, you're going to get used to putting your opponent's Kaiju in front of one of these, especially if you used Relinquished Anima in any type of deck that does so. I have a deck that does this, so I'm going to eventually show that off at some point. For now, it doesn't really matter what I do. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and summon Eidos, which is going to give me another tribute summon, and then I'm going to summon you. I'm going to return to the deck. Let's see, I want 2400 or 2800, and I'll probably take Ether. Yes, I do have the ability to use Ether in this situation. Alright, so now my Kamungus is back on the top of my deck. This is crazy, because I've basically set up my entire board. I have 2 monsters on the board. I even have monster removal. I have monster protection for my Raiza, the Storm Vassal, or Storm Monarch. And on the following turn, my opponent's turn, if I really wanted, I could even interrupt my opponent using Ether, the Heavenly Monarch, as well as Kiraz. You just have to be very careful of this, because as I showed before, you can absolutely miss timing. If you have a Kaiju on your field that was summoned by the effect of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, you cannot skip or bypass your battle phase. You must go to battle, regardless, no matter what. There are some very serious negative downsides to this. Stuff like Quaking Mirror Force could just be used against you. Mirror Force in general. So, there's that. I'm going to end my turn and see what my opponent does. It's funny that I got Raiza, the Storm Monarch, and not one of the Mega Monarchs, because it's just interesting how this works. Fiend Sanctuary. And he's summoning Caius, which has a trigger effect. He's going to banish that one card, but also I am going to go ahead and return that to the hand. And then I'm going to go ahead and use this effect. I can tribute over one tribute summoned monster with her. Let's see. How do I want to do this? I think I have to activate her effect first. And then this effect. I might be wrong, I might misplay by this, but it's whatever. Okay, no, I did not. I absolutely did that correct. You want to be careful, because in this case, I absolutely want to use the effect of Kiraz, but I'm not even going to be blowing up my opponent's cards. I'm going to be blowing up my own. So, Kiraz, and return. Then I get to draw 2. So Interrupted is no longer useful because I've already used my Kaijus. I have 2 in my hand. I only have 4 Kaijus total. One of them is banished. So I can easily just go ahead and use this, banish this card, and get my other Kaiju to my hand, just to make sure that I have it for safekeeping for later. And then I'm going to banish Return, summon you, and unfortunately I can't go in for game quite yet. But I can tribute over. Throw that away. There's going to be another target sent to the grave. Or to the deck. I think I'm going to send Ether back. That's not going to matter, buddy. Oh, so he made me miss timing. Oh no, he didn't make me miss timing. I tributed over Ether. Funny thought there. I was actually going to return the Prime Monarch to my hand so that I can put it down as a trap. Wasn't thinking. I didn't use a wind monster to tribute over. And my opponent's left with 100 attack points, or 100 life points. And with that, I think I've pretty much won, because though he's going to be able to summon... Oh, why didn't you summon? I'm pretty sure he had a monster in his hand. Very intriguing. Aha. Yeah, so this is kind of an unfortunate, funny thing about the Monarchs Awaken. I can't use this to target Raiza the Mega Monarch, because March of the Monarchs is not allowing me to target. So the reason why I have it is so that I can have a separate option rather than just having March of the Monarchs. I should have blown up March of the Monarchs and Return of the Monarchs. That's what I should have did in that situation. Oh well, it's not really that big a deal. But what is a big deal is I can go ahead and get my other Kaiju on the field. And my opponent just fails to defeat me. There's my Raiza the Mega Monarch deck. I want to thank you for joining me. If you like my content, please upvote and follow, or like and subscribe, leave a comment down below, and while you're at it, have a great and glorious day gaming.